Thanks for joining us, Vicki. You know, we've heard about overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison for more than a decade now, but this new study shows that courts are a big part of the problem, maybe more so than people had thought. Who's responsible for making sure that courts are fair and aren't adding to this problem?
Well, thanks to you, Melissa. And yeah, I think courts have, I think we've always known that the courts were just as much as part of it as a problem. And since we've had, you know, the introduction of Gladue principles and the Section 718, which is the formation of Gladue principles, they should be looking at the impacts of colonialism and the hardships that Indigenous people experience. But in my own experiences with and research around the courts is that when we do look at, even when we do look at Gladue principles, that security takes precedence. And so that the Gladue principles are, although consulted and looked at, then they still, Indigenous people still end up being charged or convicted as a result.
Yeah. You know, you study the links between colonialism and Indigenous incarceration rates. Why is it important to bear that context in mind while we're looking at these numbers?
Well, yeah, some of my own research showed that historically Indigenous people were very rarely incarcerated, at least at the federal level. And it wasn't until the 1960s when we started to see the receding of assimilation policies that at the same time we actually also started to see the incarceration of Indigenous people. So from 1960 and beforehand, it was 1% to 2% rates of incarceration, and the prisons were doing everything they could to get Indigenous people out of the prison system. And today we see quite the opposite, is that every year since 1960, the incarceration rate has only increased, despite all the attempts, whether it's Gladue or restorative justice principles, or even introducing Aboriginal culture and healing lodges. We only see the incarceration rates increase despite that. And I think that a lot of that goes back to not looking in the important colonial context in which Indigenous people are still trying to survive.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is jobs for a lot of Canadians too, keeping Indigenous people locked up. Vicki, I thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts on this, and it'll be interesting to see what these, you know, this study, where it goes from here and what sort of policy changes that we see.
Yeah, well, thanks to you, Melissa, and good luck with everything.
Thanks.